the main preoccupation, I could say, of Shannon Watch is this supposedly civilian airport that we have out in Shannon in a supposedly neutral country. And it's been used by the military from the United States since back in 2001. It's effectively been like a US military base since back then, one of the hidden scars on the shiny exterior of Ireland's neutrality. The US military used it for the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Armed troops have been going through, as I said, since 2002. Anti-war protests have been going on since back then as well. The monitoring of the military planes and the torture planes that have been coming through Shannon has been going on since back then as well. But back around 2008, we started recording every US military flight and every suspect rendition flight that's coming through the airport. So we've quite a database of that. Now, I was going to start with giving you some of the facts and figures, but can you see this? I'm going to start with a photograph of a woman some of you might recognise. She's Margaretta Darcy. She's a member of Galway Alliance Against the War, and she was incarcerated in Limerick prison yesterday for her peace activism. And really, it's the frustration of the fact that successive Irish governments have failed to live up to their responsibilities under national and international law and under their veneer or illusion of neutrality, that Margaretta has been taking action. I mean, her action was to go out on a runway to highlight what was going through Shannon Airport. She was arrested, she was charged, she was given a suspended sentence, she was asked to sign a bond that she wouldn't go back into the runway and places like that. She refused to do so, so she's been imprisoned in Limerick for 3 months. There's a demonstration, by the way, for any of you that are free tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock outside the prison in solidarity with her. But as I said, the issue that she was trying to highlight is that Shannon's supposedly civilian airport has been facilitating US war activities in Afghan and Iraq since back in 2001, 2002. It's been an important node in the US renditions network. Renditions is the sanitized word, of course, for kidnapping and torture. And we know that there have been munitions transportations through the airport, but we don't know the extent to which that has been happening or the extent to which it's going on. Just see what is here. So, just to give you an indication of the sort of thing that's coming through the airport, as I said, we're monitoring everything in terms of the US military flights. This is a photograph that was taken back in July of 2013. I think it was taken by one of my colleagues here at Oregon, who was in the room as well. And it's a photograph of a US Hercules C-130 with a large bunch of US soldiers beside it. They're either getting on or disembarking from it. Now, our Minister for Foreign Affairs tells us that the passengers or the crew on board these aircraft are not carrying any weapons. There are no weapons on board, he says, and they are not engaged in military activities, he says. Now, as far as we know, and as far as is publicly and fairly well known all over the globe, the US Army, the US military do not go anywhere without carrying their weapons with them. We also know that back in September of last year of 2013, there was one of these planes with a 30mm cannon sticking out the side, photographed in the airport. And our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Eamon Gilmore, described that as an administrative error. I'm not quite sure how a huge cannon sticking out and laser-guided missiles ready for launch at the bottom of the same aircraft could simply be described as an administrative error, but that's what he called it. We've been monitoring and photographing these for a lot of years. This was one going back in 2009. There are also a lot of much more benign looking aircraft that are also military aircraft, US Air Force or US Navy out there in the airport as well. This is a military executive jet which was photographed in July 2013. This is another US Air Force plane photographed March 2013 as well, which has a US flag up there. There are about up to 40 or 50 of these military aircraft going through Shannon Airport every month. We have asked repeatedly for inspections to ensure that they are in compliance with what the Minister says or thinks they are doing, which is having nothing whatsoever to do with war. We've repeatedly asked for inspections, we have asked what they are carrying, we've got no answers whatsoever from those about that. This is a photograph that was taken back in 2009, a US Navy Skytrain logistics aircraft. One of the interesting things about this one is that it's not carrying the normal US Navy insignia, and it is being guarded by an Irish Army security patrol. We've no idea what the cargo was, we've no idea what the mission was. We have to ask, and we have asked repeatedly again of the politicians, why is there an Irish Army and why is there often a Garda security detail on these aircraft? And again, we're given the brush off and not given any satisfactory answers to our questions. So those are the military aircraft. In addition to those, you have aircraft that are described as civilian aircraft, but they're contracted troop carriers. And the most common one to be seen out at Shannon Airport is the Omni-Air International aircrafts. For those of you who know Shannon Airport, they're down at around gate 42, down there at that end of the building. And since 2002, about 2.25 million armed troops have come through on those aircrafts through Shannon Airport. I mean, that's over half the population of Ireland carrying their weapons, carrying arms. We know in the case of these planes they are carrying their weapons because somebody spotted a weapon one day back in 2003, I think it was, and the Minister for Foreign Affairs at that time, Brian Cowan, had to admit in the Dáil that yes, these people on these particular planes were in fact carrying their weapons. But they still continue the fallacy that the military ones, the ones that look like this, don't have any weapons on them. So that's how it's told. So this is a fairly common sight. Up to 200,000 a year in some of the years. 2013, the figures were probably lower, around 70,000 of these uniformed weapon-carrying soldiers coming through our, as I said, civilian airport in a neutral country. So the other thing to mention as well is that we have potentially got other illegal and covert munitions passing through Shannon Airport. And one that I'm just highlighting here is an airline called Kalita Air. It has connections to covert intelligence and military operations. Their airplanes pass through Irish airspace regularly. December 20th and again 22nd, one of their planes landed at Shannon Airport. That was one that was of particular interest to us. One of the interesting things about Kalita Air is that back in 2006, at the height of the Lebanon-Israeli war, they were discovered to be taking laser-guided bombs from the US to Israel through Prestwick Airport. And the only reason it was discovered was because peace activists found out and brought it to the attention of the government and of the authorities. So if the likes of Kalita Air are doing that through Prestwick, there is no reason to believe they're not doing the same through Shannon. We have absolutely no confidence that the same thing is not happening in Shannon. They may have been taking laser-guided bombs through, they may have taken white phosphorus through, they may have taken depleted uranium through, they may have, because we know many of these aircraft are licensed to carry these types of material. They may also be carrying the unmanned area vehicles, the drones as they're called, that are being used to target and to kill Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen and various other parts of the world, and have resulted in unknown numbers of civilian deaths. Those things, the unmanned aerial vehicles can be boxed up in what are ironically called coffins and transported in these types of planes that are coming through Shannon regularly. So that's a quick example of the types of military aircraft that are coming through Shannon. We know that over the last decade, the US NATO actions around the globe have by and large been very heavy-handed. They have been very counterproductive. We know from the history of what has happened in Iraq, where hundreds of thousands, according to some reports, possibly millions of people have died as a result of the illegal invasion by the US and its allies of that country. We know there has been untold suffering, and there has been no diminishing of the human rights abuses that have been in Afghanistan since the US went in. And we know that now that Ireland has been covertly and consistently going along with the failed foreign policy of the US and NATO like an obedient lapdog. We know that there are huge areas of international and national law that remain uninvestigated and almost certainly being violated out at Shannon Airport. We have concerns in 4 areas in particular, and I brought along some booklets. We have a booklet called Shannon Airport, War and Renditions, which goes through the 4 areas that we have concerns about, and it gives some of the statistics as well that I've just been mentioning. But the 4 areas that we have concerns over, first one is in relation to neutrality. There was a 2003 High Court judgment. It was actually Horgan, who's in the room here, versus on Taoiseach, and it stated that Ireland was in breach of the Hague Convention on Neutrality by allowing US troops through Shannon Airport on their way to and from the war in Iraq, as it was at that time. So the judgment then highlighted the fact that a neutral state may not permit movement of large numbers of troops from of one belligerent state through its territory en route to a theatre of war. But that's what's happening in the case of Shannon. We are facilitating the movement of troops of a belligerent state through to a theatre of war, or to numerous theatres of war. We may well have been complicit in an invasion of Syria if it happened last year as well. I'm sure they would have used Shannon the same way as they did for Iraq and Afghanistan for that. So neutrality, or supposedly a neutral country, it is a fallacy. There is a phrase that has been trotted out back since the days of Gareth Fitzgerald, when he was Taoiseach, about some nonsense called military neutrality, which is that we are militarily neutral or something, which is meaningless. We are allowing an armed foreign force through our territory. And of course, successive governments have argued that we have always allowed foreign military aircraft through our airspace or through our airports, but it's been different since 2002-03. The scale of what's happening has been different, and the fact that the troops are now armed as they come through the airport in Shannon is different as well. So that's one area. The second area is international humanitarian law. Killing and harming of innocent civilians has been happening. We know from various reports that atrocities have been committed. We know from the Apache helicopter video that was released through WikiLeaks as one example. We know of other cases where there has been harming of civilians. We know that the forces that have been moving through Shannon Airport almost certainly have been in violation of the 4th and the 3rd Geneva Conventions. And we have a law here in Ireland that says, it's the Geneva Convention Act 1962, as far as I remember, that we should be taking action in cases like that where there is any involvement in contraventions of the Geneva Convention. But successive governments again have had very much hands-off in terms of not even attempting to prosecute, not even attempting to discover what war criminals might be coming through Shannon. The other thing to talk about is the area of renditions. How am I doing on time? Am I okay?
Yeah, you're fine. Okay. 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Renditions. There have been numerous reports about the use of Shannon Airport by CIA planes that have been involved in kidnapping and torture. A lot of the planes have been identified. Sources like Amnesty International, Reprieve, respective organisations like that around the world. We have recorded 22 known or suspected planes that have, aircraft numerous flights, hundreds of flights that have come through. Dick Marty, who was a rapporteur with the Council of Europe, he drew a map which he called the spider's web of the rendition networks around Europe. And he highlighted, you'll see on this map, that Shannon is one of the significant cogs in this rendition network that has been happening. So Council of Europe have documented this, the European Parliament, the Irish Human Rights Commission have raised concerns about it, Amnesty International, Reprieve, numerous other organisations. We have photographed planes that have been known to be or suspected to be involved in renditions out at Shannon. This one is N368CE, identified as a rendition plane by Reprieve. This one is N54PA, so this is a typical log we have of the flight paths that it has taken. It was in Guantanamo on the 3rd of June 2008. A few days later it came through Shannon. It went further, it came back through Shannon a few days later again. Another one which has become known as the Guantanamo Express in 379P. A little extract there from the Washington Post that says, since 2009, it's been seen at military airports from Pakistan to Indonesia to Jordan, sometimes being boarded by hooded and handcuffed passengers. And we've photographed it repeatedly at Shannon Airport as well. The successive governments again have used a sleight of hand in terms of their wording of what they have said, that there have been no evidence of prisoners having been taken through Shannon, and they sort of imply that, or strongly indicate that means there is no evidence of Shannon being involved in renditions. We have the evidence. We know from the WikiLeaks cables that were released a couple of years back that the government ministers were very concerned. They were very worried. In fact, they were probably quite certain that Shannon was being used by these rendition planes. But they will not admit it, or they will not do any investigation of that. So, what have we been up to for the last number of years in trying to do something about this? Well, we've repeatedly asked for suspect aircraft to be inspected. We've asked while the planes were on the ground. We have gone to the airport to the Garda station in Shannon, and we have asked them to inspect planes that were on the ground. They have stalled, they have prevaricated, they have come up with excuses until such times as the aircraft was gone. In some cases they have arrested or they have barred the activist or the person who was making the request from the airport. We presented no less than 2 wheelbarrows of information to the Gardaí on the 18th of March 2011, but we got a 10-line response from them to say there was no evidence of wrongdoing in Shannon. We made ongoing submissions to international bodies, like the body that has responsibility for monitoring the Convention Against Torture, for the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and for various others that Ireland has signed up to and is obliged to comply with, but would seem not to be in compliance with. There have been a range of non-violent actions going back since 2002. Now, Shannon Watch can't take credit for all of those by any manner of means. There has been the group, the Catholic Workers, Mary Kelly, who has also disarmed a US Navy plane at Shannon. There have been others, by Galway Alliance Against War, Margareta Darcy, who I showed at the start, and others. One thing that we are doing is continuing to maintain a presence and a voice of protest out at the airport, second Sunday of every month from 2 to 3 p.m. Anybody who can is welcome to come along and join us to continue to shine a spotlight on what is going on in Shannon. And we have, as I said, an information booklet as well, which you're welcome to take copies of as well. It goes through some of the details as well of what is happening at the airport. So, just to finish one point, back in, when is the present government? It's been in power since, if you would call it power, since 2011, I think. But in their programme for government, anyway, that Fine Gael and Labour hammered out, they said that they would enforce the prohibition on the use of Irish airspace, airports and related facilities for purposes not in line with the dictates of international law. And at the time, I remember when they were going into government thinking, yeah, this is a glimmer of hope. We would have seen a pattern going back over the years where there would have been certainly Fine Gael's support for a shift towards NATO, which Ireland isn't a member of now but has been cozying up to over the years. We would have hoped that Labour would have been more principled in this matter, particularly as a result of the strong statements that some of their politicians who are now in government and cabinet would have made over the years. But the hope has faded, and instead of using whatever influence that Ireland might have in terms of looking for creative, peaceful, healthy alternatives to war, to the type of wars that benefit the elite, kill, maim, impoverish peoples all over the world. In fact, what we're getting is that Ireland is continuing through Shannon Airport to provide a lot of logistical support to US imperial overreach, I guess you would say, and it's happening every day of the week out there in Shannon. So I'll finish it at that. Hopefully I haven't gone on for too long, so thanks very much.